Welcome to the Dev Journal. Today, we are exploring the massive surge in artificial intelligence infrastructure and the hidden tax it places on every engineer. We are pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into hardware. Yet the resulting complexity is forcing a desperate search for radical architectural simplification and automated management to prevent a total collapse. We are investigating how major software systems fail following heavy layoffs, and the lessons in radical simplicity we can learn from the engineering culture at SpaceX. We also examine the recent security breach at the European Commission to understand why our cloud environments have grown far too complex for traditional defense strategies to handle effectively.
Sloan, those cloud failures are just the tip of the iceberg when you consider the 21-day outlook for NVIDIA. I am looking at the institutional buying signals that suggest the market is ignoring the technical debt. We will also break down how large language model agents are now writing their own graphics processing unit kernels.
Vance, the prospect of machines writing their own optimization loops illustrates why we must focus on this complexity tax. We have a lot to unpack as we navigate these massive capital expenditures and architectural shifts. Stay with us because our deep dive into the future of automated infrastructure begins right now.
Right now, artificial intelligence just released AutoKernel, and the sheer scale of the automated iteration here is staggering for any systems engineer. We are looking at a framework that can independently execute between 300 and 400 experiments in a single 10-hour overnight window without a human ever touching a keyboard. This autonomous loop targets the massive bottleneck in graphics processing unit optimization by utilizing a 909-line instruction document titled Program.Markdown. This playbook encodes a 6-tier optimization strategy specifically for high-end hardware like the NVIDIA Hopper architecture, allowing the agent to navigate complex hardware constraints. The results are undeniably impressive, with the agent achieving 2,788 gigabytes per second for root mean square normalization on an H100. That represents 83% of the peak memory bandwidth of the device, effectively beating the performance of Torch.Compile Max Auto-Tune in 12 out of 16 test configurations. Despite these speed gains, the real challenge for large language models remains reliability, as they typically fail to beat standard baselines in over 80% of one-shot attempts. To counter this, the team implemented a 5-stage correctness harness that includes numerical stability tests and determinism verification to catch the race conditions these models often miss.
Vance, you have highlighted the raw power of the hardware, but I am looking at how this shifts the entire economic model of development. By removing the need for constant human intervention in the optimization process, we are finally seeing a way to reduce the crushing operational costs that have plagued every major artificial intelligence project this year. Seeing a Triton floating 0.4 matrix multiplication kernel outperform hand-optimized Cutlass C++ code by 2.15 times on H100 hardware is a watershed moment. It suggests that these autonomous agents are finally overcoming their initial failure rates, turning what used to be weeks of manual labor into a routine overnight task. The introduction of a 5-stage correctness harness provides the necessary guardrails for moving these autonomous optimizations into actual production environments. Numerical stability and determinism are no longer just aspirations. They are integrated safety checks that allow companies to trust the code written by machines without fearing catastrophic failures in their most expensive infrastructure. This ability to automate the deepest layers of our software stack highlights a growing divide between efficient code and the sprawling environments where it lives. As we master the optimization of individual kernels, we must now confront the security vulnerabilities created by the increasingly complex and layered tools we use to manage these vast cloud systems. The recent breach of the European Commission serves as a sobering reminder of how vulnerable even the most protected public institutions remain. Attackers from the group Shiny Hunters managed to exfiltrate 340 gigabytes of data from an Amazon Web Services environment. This was not a simple password guess, but a deep infiltration through a trusted tool. What is truly alarming is the 5-day window where the attackers operated entirely under the radar. From March 19th to March 24th, these actors roamed through the system before the Cybersecurity Operations Center noticed unusual application programming interface activity. That delay allowed 340 gigabytes of sensitive data to exit the building completely unnoticed by staff. This incident perfectly mirrors the findings in the 2026 Fortinet report, which indicates that 88% of organizations now operate in hybrid or multi-cloud environments. When your infrastructure is spread across multiple providers, visibility gaps become an inevitability. We are seeing the attack surface grow much faster than our human-led defenses can realistically monitor. Vance, looking at the technical specifics of how this breach bypassed the primary defenses of the Commission, what does the weaponization of their own internal scanning tools tell us about the current state of supply chain security? It seems like our very tools are being turned against us in ways we never anticipated during their initial deployment.
The vulnerability started with a supply chain compromise of the Trivy security scanner, which is meant to protect the system. By inadvertently providing attackers with Amazon Web Services application programming interface keys, the scanner became a literal map for the infiltration. It is a classic example of how a single point of failure in the toolchain can collapse everything. Once inside, the threat actors utilized Trufflehog within the accounts of the Commission to scan for additional secrets and validate stolen credentials. This is the ultimate irony of modern security engineering. The software we install to find and fix leaked secrets is now being leveraged by attackers to expand their reach across the entire cloud network with surgical precision. According to the data, 70% of organizations identify tool sprawl as the primary barrier to effective cloud security, with 81% of organizations relying on 2 or more cloud providers. The credential dependencies have become a tangled mess. We have reached a level of complexity where even specialized engineers struggle to maintain a clear picture of their permissions. This catastrophic failure at the European Commission demonstrates that adding more layers of monitoring often just adds more ways to fail. To truly secure these systems, we might need to abandon this obsession with complex toolchains entirely. Perhaps we should look toward radical system simplification, much like the lean engineering philosophies that keep high-stakes missions at SpaceX safe.
SpaceX has pioneered a philosophy that seems counterintuitive to traditional software growth by prioritizing the total removal of parts rather than their optimization. By eliminating a failure point entirely, they reduce the iteration time required for complex missions. This approach is becoming a vital survival strategy for technology companies that are currently operating with significantly reduced headcounts. We are seeing the fallout from the pre-2022 era, where massive budgets and oversized teams masked the true operational costs of over-engineered architectures. Many development teams built systems for imaginary day one scalability problems that simply do not exist in the real world. Now those companies are paying the price for maintenance on features that provide zero value. There is a deep cultural issue where engineers often equate the number of services they manage with their own seniority and professional worth. Shifting toward a culture of system deconstruction could be the only way to prevent these platforms from breaking under current economic pressures. We need to value the engineer who removes code just as much as the one who writes it.
How does that play out when a single user request has to hop through 20 different microservices just to fetch a profile picture? That structural complexity is the purest definition of technical debt, because it turns simple debugging into a week-long detective investigation. When you lose staff, the remaining engineers lack the cognitive capacity to hold that map. This abstraction trap creates a scenario where even the most basic features requires coordination across 3 or 4 separate teams. Every additional dependency or service adds a hidden cost in system understanding that typically goes untracked until something catastrophic happens. We are finding that adding more tools to manage the complexity only accelerates the rate of failure for these systems. Real system deconstruction means actually deleting the abstractions instead of just trying to make them run faster on cheaper hardware. If a component is not essential to the core mission of the product, it represents a liability that will eventually fail. We have to be willing to tear down the very things we spent years building if we want to survive. The engineering reality is that most systems were never designed to be lean, because growth was the only metric that mattered for a decade. Now that the headcount is gone, the ghosts of those over-engineered decisions are haunting the production logs every single night. Simplification is no longer optional. It is now a requirement for operational stability in this market.
While we examine the internal engineering philosophy of simplification, the broader market is looking at how these decisions impact the bottom line. It is time to move from the engineering philosophy of simplification to the financial realities of the companies building these massive systems. Let us take a look at the 21-day outlook for NVIDIA and their guidance. We are shifting our focus to the market heavyweight that defines the current era of computation. NVIDIA has issued a staggering quarterly revenue guidance of $78 billion. This represents a 65.47% year-over-year increase, signaling that the hyper-growth phase of artificial intelligence infrastructure is still accelerating. Financial institutions are not just watching this growth from the sidelines, but are deeply embedded in the stock. Institutional ownership remains high at 69.73%, which provides a massive structural floor. This support is critical as the market moves toward the analyst consensus price target of $268.22. Analyzing the technical momentum, the relative strength index currently sits at 43.57. This tells us the stock is far from being overbought and has plenty of room to climb toward the $200 psychological level. Investors are clearly positioning themselves for another significant run before the next major earnings announcement.
While those growth projections are certainly impressive, the sheer scale of the operation required to maintain them is what I find most notable. Managing a 71.07% gross margin while scaling to a $4.32 trillion market capitalization is an unprecedented feat of operational efficiency and pricing power. Though the company generated $96.68 billion in free cash flow over the last 12 months, the volatility remains a concern. With a beta of 2.33, this stock is highly susceptible to massive price swings during any sudden macroeconomic shocks. High efficiency does not always protect you from instability. The projected earnings per share growth of 34.3% for the year is the primary catalyst driving institutional positioning right now. Every analyst is circling the May 20th earnings report on their calendar. They are waiting to see if the actual delivery can keep pace with the massive expectations built into the current valuation. We are essentially watching a high-stakes race between fundamental earnings power and the gravity of a cooling global economy. Even with such dominant margins, the pressure to sustain this level of growth is immense. If the hardware cycle shows even a slight hint of slowing down, that high beta could turn a small correction into a painful slide.
That hardware dominance creates a massive ripple effect across the entire software ecosystem. As NVIDIA supplies the underlying power, we must evaluate how the cloud giants are spending their billions to turn that infrastructure into real revenue. This brings us to Alphabet and their upcoming earnings report, which will test the true success of their monetization efforts. Google Search is proving its resilience despite the loud voices claiming that artificial intelligence would disrupt the core business model. In fact, their market share recently expanded from 70% to 75%. This growth shows that users are sticking with the familiar experience, even as the underlying technology evolves rapidly behind the scenes. This dominance is fueled by a massive trailing 12-month revenue of $402.84 billion. That represents a 15.09% year-over-year increase, which is remarkable for a company of this scale. It demonstrates that the integration of artificial intelligence is driving more value rather than cannibalizing existing search traffic. Beyond search, the company is making aggressive moves to secure its future infrastructure. The $32 billion acquisition of Wiz and new tensor processing unit licensing deals with Anthropic highlight a strategic shift. They are not just providing the software, but are becoming the essential hardware backbone for the next generation of cloud computing. Investors are now looking toward the upcoming first quarter earnings report on April 23, 2026. Analysts are projecting a nearly 20% quarterly revenue increase, which could be the catalyst needed to close the gap. Currently, the stock price sits at $299.99, well below the consensus target.
How do we reconcile those growth figures with the staggering price tag attached to this expansion? Alphabet is projecting a 2026 capital expenditure of $170 billion to scale their infrastructure, even with a net margin of 32.81%. Deploying that much capital creates a very narrow path for error. We also have to account for the recent 9% stock pullback triggered by the Lowe's Angels jury verdict against YouTube. This liability ruling introduces a fresh wave of litigation risk that might dampen the enthusiasm surrounding those tensor processing unit deals. The market is clearly weighing these legal headaches against the aggressive price targets from analysts. While the consensus analyst price target of $376.29 suggests significant upside, regulatory headwinds remain a persistent drag. It is one thing to grow market share to 75%, but quite another to defend that position against mounting global antitrust pressure. The technical momentum is currently fighting these legal variables. That struggle to balance massive spending with legal reality is not unique to Alphabet as we look across the sector. That same scrutiny applies as we move toward Microsoft, which is currently stuck in a difficult pre-earnings holding pattern. Their technicals appear oversold, while investors question the actual return on their artificial intelligence investments.
Microsoft is currently navigating a particularly turbulent period that has caught many by surprise. The stock has seen a decline of over 25% since the start of the year. This movement has pushed the 14-day relative strength index down to 28.95, indicating that the shares are now in deeply oversold territory. While the market seems hesitant, the disparity between the current share price of $372.88 and the average analyst target is striking. Wall Street experts are eyeing a target of $587.31. This suggests a massive valuation gap that could represent a significant opportunity for patient long-term investors. The underlying business fundamentals actually appear remarkably resilient despite the recent bearish news sentiment. Microsoft maintains a strong gross margin of 68.82% and trailing net income growth of 15.54%. These figures suggest that their competitive moat remains intact even as they scale their global infrastructure to support new demand. We are likely entering a quiet period where the stock trades sideways for approximately 21 days leading up to April 27. This anticipation will culminate with the third quarter earnings report on April 29th. It is the moment everyone is waiting for to see if the reality matches the high expectations set by the firm.
The market hesitation makes sense when you look at the sheer scale of the capital expenditure being proposed. Microsoft is projected to spend between $100 billion and $120 billion on artificial intelligence infrastructure in 2026 alone. That is an astronomical amount of capital to deploy, while the return on investment remains a major question. We are already seeing signs of friction as Azure cloud revenue growth decelerated to 28% year over year. When you combine that slowdown with massive international commitments, like $10 billion in Japan and $1 billion in Thailand. The short-term risks become much clearer. Large-scale infrastructure takes time to generate the cash flow needed to justify these costs. My primary concern lies in how this aggressive spending will impact the bottom line in the coming quarters. While the current net margin stands at a healthy 36.15%, these massive outlays have a way of narrowing those figures quickly. Investors are rightly worried that the cost of staying competitive in the cloud race might erode their overall efficiency. Ultimately, this financial pressure is forcing a level of technical simplification we have not seen in years. As companies realize they cannot simply spend their way out of complexity, they are streamlining architectures to keep margins stable. This shift toward leaner systems is the direct result of the immense capital requirements currently defining the artificial intelligence landscape today. Looking at the performance side, the use of large language model agent loops in AutoKernel shows just how desperate we are to automate the grueling process of graphics processing unit optimization, while giants like NVIDIA and Alphabet navigate a landscape where massive institutional buying signals clash with growing regulatory headwinds and immense infrastructure costs.
That relentless drive for efficiency reveals the true cost of our current trajectory, where every new layer of artificial intelligence infrastructure demands an equal measure of architectural simplification to remain viable while creating a constant tug-of-war between the complexity tax of global scale systems and the urgent need for automated engineering solutions. As we navigate these shifting technical and financial tides, we thank you for joining us for these deep dives into the systems shaping our future, because rethinking how we build and sustain the digital world remains the only path forward until we return for another edition of the Dev Journal.